Hey guys, I'm Caleb Giddings for Gunday Brunch, and Keith can't be with us this week since he is enjoying a vacation. So, what we've decided to do is air an interview that I did last year with my good friend Hilton Yam of 10-8 Performance. Thank you everyone for listening. Make sure you like, share, subscribe to this video if you're watching on YouTube. And if you're watching on, or listening, I should say, on iTunes or Spotify, make sure you go ahead and leave us one of those sweet 5-star reviews, especially after you listen to this hour-long interview with Hilton from 10-8 Performance. It's one of my favorite interviews I've ever done. It was previously aired. However, I think for a lot of you, this will be the first time hearing it. And also, make sure you support our sponsors who will appear in a lovely banner right after I'm done talking, and also guns.com, who is sponsoring the podcast and doesn't have a cool banner yet. But that is it for our intro. So I'd like to introduce you guys to Hilton. Hilton, tell people who you are, what you do, and why we should care.
Oh boy. Wow, that's a pretty tall order. That why we should care part. That's a lot of pressure. Well, I am a retired FBI agent. Did 21 years here in the Miami division. As one of the largest in the FBI. I worked violent crimes, and I was on SWAT the whole time. And in my spare time, instead of sleeping and stuff like that, I worked on 1911s. And so to kind of double back on that, I'd grown up shooting 1911s in IPSC before the formation of USPSA. Yeah, I'm that old, and I started young anyway. But when we got the guns 1911s issued to us in the SWAT program when I was just a wee SWAT youngster, I was like, wait a minute, I don't have my gunsmith with me for everything that I'm doing. Basically, he was right there with me. I was like, hey, something's wrong here, do this. And then, he would come back and be ready for the next stage. So I figured I should learn it for myself. And through the years, I got to watch the program guns come from new in the box till when I boxed them up and sent them away to get turned into manhole covers or whatever. And that kind of turned into a thing. So I built 1911s and I started designing parts for them. Formed my own company, 10-8 Performance. And now that I am retired, I'm doing that full time.
That was actually a very comprehensive resume. I remembered talking to you about the fact that you shot IPSC before it was USPSA, and it's one of those things where that's kind of like one of those lines where for me it's always been USPSA. I don't remember a time like I read about IPSC when I read Enos's book, and he was talking about
Right.
IPSC, and I'm like, oh, okay, cool. What's IPSC? And then I was like, oh, it's USPSA.
Right.
So it is it's definitely an interesting generational line. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is, so when you came through the FBI's training program, how surprised were you at how shitty everyone is at shooting?
Huh. That's an excellent question. Well, we had a pretty intensive firearms program, and I actually had done a lot of shooting. I used to carry Glock 19 as a CCW right around the time that I was getting in, and I was the second class ever to be issued a Glock. The side back of my head's in that 1998 Glock annual FBI gets the Glock or whatever it was. I got to find it actually. It's here in the office somewhere. So I hadn't really I didn't have the depth of the shooting skill and experience with a Glock, and it's horrendous. Especially, remember, think about 1997 Gen 2 triggers. It's like
Ooh.
stirring a box of rocks with a stick with a really heavy spring on it. So it's a little bit of work. So I wasn't ready for some of the constraints because the FBI's marksmanship program or rather the firearms program is very marksmanship intensive. So we're shooting, the qual course included 18 rounds at 25 yards,
Mm-hmm.
which is and on a time hack. So while by IPSC standards not particularly difficult, the time hack USPSA standard. Sorry, I'm gonna date myself, but I didn't really put a lot of effort into doing that with my Glock because I only carried it as a defensive gun. I never shot matches with it, so I didn't think about that because shooting, hey, here's your optic compensated 1911 double stack gun. Hey, go take that 25-yard headshot. Yeah, big deal. We got a 2-pound trigger. Bam, done.
Mm.
Hey, shoot shoot into here with that Glock 23. Hadn't tried that before.
Slightly more challenging.
Yeah. So to bring that around to your question, because it's kind of a long answer, but I like detail. Like the detail. We're here to chat. It challenged me in ways that were different. Now, when we got to combat shooting, they're like, "Hey, who's this kid?" It was kind of just mediocre at 25 yards. Yeah. So it balanced out because we had a lot of guys, former Ellie and Mill in my class, who were very good at the marksmanship stuff. And one dude was a buddy of mine who was into the action shooting. We kind of stuck out when it was time to do the action shooting. So it was pretty well rounded. So at the time that I came through, being the dinosaur that I am, it was very, very well gun intensive for a firearms program. How about that?
Yeah, that's nice to hear. It's one of those things where people, you sort of get two extremes in the civilian side of how people think about military and law enforcement training paradigms. You either have the people who think that cops don't shoot at all and the training is all universally crappy, or the people that think that cops shoot all the time and the training is universally good, when obviously the reality is it's highly agency dependent, it's budget dependent, it's all of these things. Like, people are surprised to find out that Air Force military police, which we call security forces, we only qual annually, but we actually have in the regs a budget and ammo for quarterly sustainment training, which is not something that some regular domestic LE agencies do. We still can't shoot for shit for the most part because units don't always use that ammo for good sustainment training. A lot of time it turns into, let's go to the range and turn money, and we have to shoot this ammo because if we don't shoot it, we won't get it in the budget next year. But some units do use it for good training. So, but that's, it's those of us in the industry have always kind of held the FBI's firearms training program in pretty high regard. And I know a lot of civilian trainers use the FBI qual course as sort of a metric of like, if you can pass the FBI qual course, I'm relatively comfortable with you carrying a gun on the street.
Sure.
So you mentioned compensated dot equipped double stack 2011s, which in the context of 1998, they all had Seymours mounted on them and were this long and looked like a battleship anchor. Yeah.
6-inch, 7-inch. Actually, at the time that I was kind of getting out of that game, the 7-port compensator was kind of a thing. So you'd have a 5-inch slide, skeletonized slide, maybe a commander length slide, 4 1/4, but with a 7-port compensator. Because remember, major caliber back then was 175, or major power factor rather, was 175. So I was shooting like a 188 power factor 38 super with a 124 grain bullet out of a triple port comp. Man, that thing worked really good.
I bet that shit was loud.
What?
Yeah, exactly. Oh man, the one gun. I regret selling a lot of guns, but one that I really, really regret selling was when I was a million years ago, when I was kind of really first getting into this. I managed to pick up on Gunbroker an old Auto Ordnance 38 Super 1911 that had been tuned up by old school Wilson Combat before it was Wilson Combat. So it had that single port. It was like a 1970s era open gun, basically, because it had that single port compensator built into it. It had a nice flared magwell on it. It was a single stack, and that gun was super rad. And I sold it because I was dumb. That's like the only 1911, because I've had a gazillion 1911s, and that one I really regret selling because God, that gun was cool. So to the
we all got one of those in our past that we I wish I'd kept it.
Yeah. So to the topic of double stack comped red dot equipped 1911s, a little background for people listening. Hilton and I first met in person when I took your armorer's course, which feels like a million years ago. And at the time, 1911s weren't super popular. They were very much a niche gun. Guys who carried them because they liked them, and you had onesie twosies agencies that issued them. And 2011s for people who don't know, it's basically it's a catch-all term for a double stack 1911. And 2011s were reserved entirely for competition use. Like nobody was carrying these things. The only people that had them were people shooting USPSA and IDPA. Fast forward, and you retire from the FBI, and all of a sudden, everybody and their sister's making 2011s.
Right. Yeah. So actually, towards the our 1911 program for the FBI SWAT ended up kind of subsiding. It kind of went out on a slow taper as the guns aged and died, because it was the same number of guns for each team nationwide. So ours, I mean, they had a hard life over 15 some years.
Oh yeah.
15 years of very high round count. It's not like, hey, we shot 50 rounds this year. No, guys are shooting 6, 12, 15,000 rounds a year out of those things. And then they move on and pass it on to someone else. So they get pretty dogged out. But anyway, yeah, so I ended up finishing out my career with a Glock 19M, which, as most folks know, is just a differently marked Gen 5 Glock. But the 19M was made for a contract, and everyone was loving those things. And I figured, hey, you know what? Glock is... I've come full circle, and I'll shoot this in my retirement. I was doing experiments with compensators and doing the stuff with optics, and honestly, no one cared. And then I was watching social media, as you said. Suddenly, everyone had a Staccato P 2011, and I was watching a lot of the folks on social media who grew up shooting Glocks, and well, by and large Glocks or other plastic type pistols, talking about the thing like they're waving around. So this is really cool. This is my new Staccato P. It's black, and oh man, it's really cool. And then they'd snap the slide shot on the empty chamber, which told me that they didn't come up in a culture of the 1911. So that alone, actually watching that onslaught of eye-gougingly horrible and awkward, technically awkward social media videos, I contacted the company and said, hey, not for nothing, but you guys are coming up big and strong in this LE market, and maybe it would help if you guys had an armor program and a guy on the tactical team, their sponsor shooting team of, I hate the word, but influencer. Just choked on the word. Anyway, social media personalities, someone who is a technical guy. Now, I can't grow a beard, and I don't have any tattoos or anything, but I do speak the technical language of the gun. I can speak to law enforcement, and I can speak to the manufacturing side of things. So I can do a lot of things for you guys. So like, hey, that sounds like a great idea. And there was, back in the midst of things with a 1911 derivative. So yeah, I thought I was done with them, but the market said, nope, we're going to suck you back in.
And it's been crazy to watch the whole 2011 thing, because for people that don't understand the tactical side of the industry, or which focuses on law enforcement and concealed carry use, has been like hardcore. Like it went from like Glocks are the best, and then it went to red dot equipped Glocks are the best, and these Glocks started taking this strange trajectory towards open guns, basically, until people were carrying comped red dot equipped Glocks with Surefire X300s on them, and then they started making concealed carry magwells, and I was like, am I the only one who is looking at like a shitty version of an open gun right now?
Right. Exactly.
And then I think there was like this thing that happened, and people were like, wait a minute, why am I doing all of this when I could just get why am I doing all of this work to get a super great trigger out of this gun that doesn't have a great trigger when I can just start with a good trigger? And I think, and I cannot figure out how we ended up with 2011s being cool again. I really can't. Do you have any thoughts on how this happened? Because it really feels like it was overnight. Like it went from Glocks to I'm going to buy a Staccato or a Chambers Custom or a Triarch or whoever else is making them.
Sure. Yeah, that has been a topic that I have studied for some bit now, and in looking at it, in 2017, a corporate takeover occurred at then STI, which obviously is now named Staccato. As part of the rebranding, I know there's a lot of teeth gnashing, and for whatever people may think of the new name or the concept of rebranding it, they wanted to get away from that legacy where it was a company which for the better part of 20-something years was totally happy with handing out magazines with the guns that they knew didn't work.
Yeah.
They knew that they didn't work. A quick side on this, Chip McCormick, magazine magnate, now retired, he was one of the original three guys in on what we now know as the 2011, the modular 1911 frame kit. And he told me, because we were pretty tight for some bit while I was coming up, and he said, yeah, I was behind the marketing and development, and had other guys as the technical side for the gunsmithing stuff. And I said, hey, we need to reinvest and purchase a better press to form these magazines, because we got to finish them all by hand to get them all to work. Because I'd ask them, how come the old mags used to work? Because we hand finished them all, which is what people are paying to do now.
Mm-hmm.
So you had this company which basically came out of that legacy where they knew from the jump, Chip was with them for year one only. They knew from that 1992 that the magazines weren't going to work, and that company was okay with that. So when the corporate takeover occurred in 2017, they said, well, here's the biggest issue. You got this great shooting platform, and it's a known issue. Everybody knows it, that the magazines don't work unless you invest another $100 each magazine to tune them and, sew them into the heart of a dead chicken and get them to work. So they went first and retooled and created a Gen 2 magazine. So after 25 years or whatever, yeah, it was exactly 25 years, from 92 to 2017, finally a Gen 2 magazine. That alone created a great jump in the level of success for the company, because now you could just buy a magazine. So if you were interested in having the gun for tactical use, concealment carry, whatever, you could just buy it and not have to worry about doing the voodoo. Just magazines would work. So that was a big one. And then the corporate takeover, they changed the way they made the guns. So also, instead of, hey, this is most of the way there, it's real nice. And if we expect the users probably tear out a bunch of the parts and put in their own stuff, so that's okay. So here, we'll make this, and then good luck. So that whole corporate structure and everything changed too. They took everything in-house as much as they could, and also U.S. made materials and U.S. parts, which was not the case before.
Yeah, I remember the old STIs had a lot of parts from countries that if you bought a 1911 wholesale from them, you wouldn't expect it to work.
Correct.
And you guys out there listening, you have Google, you can figure out which countries we're talking about. Mm-hmm. But I think, and it's been interesting, at least to me, it's been interesting because I've never really thought of a double stack 2011 as what you would call a serious duty gun. And all of a sudden, the Staccatos, especially, they're approved for duty use by the U.S. Marshals, and you've got federal LE using them. LAPD and LA Sheriff's Department have got them approved for use as well. And I'm like, and again, there's a little bit of bewilderment going on. While I'm watching
I had the same, sure.
But it's funny because, when you talk about magazines, there was, and this, obviously, a lot of people who are listening to this had no idea that there was, for the longest time, an entire cottage industry developed to making your STI mags work. Like there were dudes who literally all they did was they sold springs or followers, or they would, crimp your feed lips just so, and all of this other stuff just to get those damn mags to work.
Right. You got to polish the inside of the tube and all that kind of stuff.
And I remember I was at a match at Universal in Frostproof, and it was raining because it was frostproof, and this was the first time I'd ever seen somebody do this, and I forget who it was, but there was a guy on my squad who after every stage would take his mags apart and brush out the inside and then put his mags back together. And I was shooting a Glock 35, so I didn't have to do that. And I was like, hey, I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, oh, I got to clean my mags in between every stage or the gun won't work. And I'm like,
Hmm.
just jamming stuff into my mag. I'm like, that looks like
Right.
it sucks.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you had to wipe down the spring and make sure it was clean if you dropped it in the sand. And sometimes some of the mags you had to oil the inside of the tube. So obviously that makes a disaster when you drop in the sand.
Oh yeah,
So
especially,
yeah,
oh gross.
yeah,
So
that
for
was a thing.
so for people who are carrying these guns, you've got I you mentioned something, slamming the slide on an empty chamber,
Hmm.
and a lot of people have bought into the 2011 and the 1911 thing, and they don't know, and I feel like they want to treat it like a Glock 23 or a
Right.
Glock 19, and you can't,
Hmm.
can you?
Right. And I mean, you could, but keep in mind, one is $500 that is assembled at the factory. And at the factory, as depending on which factory you're familiar with, they have nomenclature where you got the assemblers, like the dude at Jiffy Lube, who's got basically one tool, like a hammer and maybe a pin punch, and he throws the guns together from an array of parts. And then you have some limited gunsmithing that might occur for like say mid-level 1911 that you get for about 1,000 to 1,500 bucks. And then at the STI factory, there's cadre of people with CNC machines, measuring stuff out. There's hand tools involved, and it's a bunch of high-level fitting. So yes, you could treat your expensive 2011 Leica Glock, but you paid for it to have that super nice trigger, level of accuracy, that bank vault feel, like everyone's like, oh, rack that back and forth, see how smooth it is. Well, go rack your Glock and feel how smooth it's not. Okay. Yeah. Clank, 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 clank. So if you want that as your end state, then do whatever you want. Don't listen to me. I don't care.
So one of the things, and the reason why I brought up the empty chamber thing is there's a number of videos of me from when I was doing these 1911 endurance tests, probably 3 or 4 years ago, where I'll use your 10.8 performance 1911 extractor evaluation.
Mm-hmm.
And people who don't know the purpose of what I'm doing always get mad because they're like, you shouldn't, fire around without a magazine in it and then let the chamber slam home. And I'm like, hey,
Sure.
this is, and I got so tired of explaining why I was doing it that I just copy pasted. Here's the reason why we're doing this, because extractor function is super important. So
There you
for
go.
these people who have never carried a 1911 or a 2011 before and are new to the platform, what are some of the considerations like to change from Glock to, 2011 or 1911? Like, what are some of the things that they should be looking for in their
Mm-hmm.
guns, regardless of whether it's a staccato or, they bought a Springfield range officer or something like that?
Sure. I think the main thing, if you want to prolong the trigger pull, and more so on a higher end gun like the Staccato, where the engagement surfaces are more refined and there's less engagement surface to get that nice trigger break, where you don't want to drop the slide on the empty chamber. The shortest answer for those with ADD and other short attention span issues is it degrades the engagement surfaces in your fire control unit. So those parts are not meant to bang around like that. Without the cushioning of feeding a loaded round from the magazine. And also, if you do the quick math, that is not how the trigger movement and the gun cycles because the other arguments, Hilton's an idiot, he doesn't know what he's talking about, which is usually an entertaining assertion from Joe Bob 6969, posting from his mother's basement or whatever
Some guy with
Harvard
no
Cheeto does.
profile picture, some guy with no
Right,
profile
right,
picture and 2 followers is like, oh, this guy's
right.
never worked on 1911s.
Right. So, but uh, when you are firing, your finger is still holding the trigger to the rear during the cycling of the gun and the subsequent trigger reset, which locks all those components together and keeps them from rattling around. Different than when you're posing for your Instagram photo with your phone and you got your lock back 2011, 1911, and you snap it shut, and all of the parts are basically free to rattle around under
Hmm.
inertia.
That's a very good answer, and I have ADD, so even I could follow that.
Nice, nice.
What about so there's some other stuff too, like explain to me, like I'm an idiot because I am, why extractor why extractor tension is so important with
Sure.
1911s, and why it's a little bit of wizardry to get it just right.
Right. So in 1911, and pretty much that is the only gun that you could probably easily find at this point, which has an extractor which is machined out of a piece of straight spring steel, spring tempered steel, and then it is bent into a curved shape, kind of like the leaf spring on your automobile. Every other pistol design, and we'll use a Glock because it's an easy one, everyone's seen one, uses a spring-loaded extractor, which has a plunger and a coil spring. Any person with the 8-hour, well, actually, I mean, you can watch YouTube, and it'll take you just a few minutes, can change out the extractor on a Glock. And there's no fitting, no voodoo, because all the parts fall in under a certain geometry, and that tension that's required is with a very inexpensive coil spring versus a leaf spring that has a certain amount of bend in it. In 1911 or 2011, you got to put in just the right amount of bend, and because there's so many different tolerance variations and the way the gun is put together, you got to make sure all the hook dimensions are right relative to the cartridge, relative to the breech face. It is not a drop-in thing. And I know there's going to be somebody inevitably who will see or hear this go, well, I dropped in this such and such extractor in my gun, it works. Good for you. I'm glad.
Yeah. Sometimes
statistically, well, and also, do you really know that it works? Because if you dropped it in after having only watched the YouTube about how to take it out and then put one back in, are you really evaluating properly that it works or not? Do you really know? Because you fired one magazine out of it,
right?
So you're telling the Ferrari mechanic that your vehicle is fine when you just turn up the radio and don't worry about that black smoke coming out of the back of it. But my vehicle's fine.
Well, and that's one of the things that people, that I think a lot of people who are new to the 1911 thing don't necessarily understand is it's not like a polymer pistol, like a Glock or, I've got like 5 Beretta APXs in this locker behind me, and I can take any part out of any one of those APXs and put it in a different APX, and it will fit, and the gun will function just fine, and I don't have to worry about it. And if I bought 2 Springfield, and I'm not picking on Springfield, it's just they make
popular brand, they're big brand, yeah.
Popular brand and a good brand. Like if you had to pick a 1911 manufacturer that you're probably going to get a good gun from, I would say Springfield Armory. Yep, but if I take 2 Springfield Armory 1911s and I take the extractor out of one and I try to put it into the other one, there's no guarantee that it will fit, and there's no guarantee that the gun will work.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, and the same thing with like the thumb safety, same kind of deal. That's a real big one. You could pull that one out, and maybe it stops the trigger mechanism on one gun, maybe it doesn't. So it was a whole different era of design and manufacturing. The technology technology was expensive, and the availability of it, there just wasn't that much. At the turn of the previous century, and now we have all that technology. But human labor is expensive now, and it was less so then. So during wartime production, and I've seen the gauges, they had go, no-go gauges for the parts. So if you stuck the part in and it didn't gauge correctly, they'd fit them or tension them or do whatever until it fit, or they throw it out if, depending what the case may be. But somebody was sorting all those, so at the end of the day, per the GI blueprints, you'd have what appeared to be a more or less drop together gun, because somebody sorted out all the parts to make sure they're all the same.
Right. Another interesting thing that you bring up is modern manufacturing processes and techniques and stuff like that. And people are always complaining about one specific manufacturing technique, and it's because they're stupid and they don't know how manufacturing works. But everybody is always upset about metal injection molded parts, and they're like, oh, especially, and even in on the revolver side of things, people are like, oh, there's MIM in this. Smith and Wesson famously changed their triggers from a forged piece of steel to a metal injection molded trigger and a metal injection molded hammer. And one of the things people don't understand is that a good MIM part is going to be a good part. If the process is done correctly, then you're going to have a good part. A crappy forged part is going to be a crappy part. It's
agreed.
The process is important, but and I think MIM got a lot of its bad reputation deservedly from crappy MIM parts that were put into timber to keep the cost of the guns down.
Right, right. There's a stage when they brought the process, because if you look at the early Kimber guns, I remember the American Handgun article when they first came out, and MIM was hailed as the most amazing thing because they were able to get this gun, a production gun with a more or less fitted, shaped, upswept beaver tail, the safety, all the features that the Kimber had, which back in 1996 or whatever was a big deal to have all these features on a gun that was a production gun at a production gun price. And it worked out. And then at some point, like basically right before the Series 2, so around somewhere in the '03 to '05 era, they changed subcontractors for the MIM process and they brought it all in-house for cost savings, not for efficiency or anything else. And exactly what you're talking about. So yeah, then it all went to hell. Because before that, no one cared that the stuff was MIM because those guns worked and they were good to go.
Yeah, it was very interesting to see, like, and people in the industry, obviously we talk about old Kimbers versus new Kimbers, and how the old Kimbers were great guns, and then the newer Kimbers were well, they weren't so good. So let's talk about 1911 manufacturers here for a minute. So run down the list. We've got Springfield. Let me back this up and I'll turn it into a question. Other than Springfield, who I think we can all agree makes great 1911s and imports crappy polymer pistols.
Well played.
Oh, I've been on Springfield Armory's shit list forever because and it's funny, and I'll do a quick sidebar. So years and years ago, I wrote an article called like the 5 most overrated guns, and it was pure clickbait nonsense, and it had the Springfield XD as number 1. And for a long time, that article ranked on the front page of Google searches for Springfield XDs because I'm good at my job. But what was funny was I wrote that article after I shot an XD. I shot one of the first XDM 525 competition guns, and I liked it. It was fine for what it was. For what it was actually a pretty good gun. I had actually shot. I've probably shot somewhere in between 10 and 15,000 rounds just through XDs. So that article put me on their shit list, even though I'm like, this is just kind of a joke, guys. Everybody needs to calm down. And then I shot a couple of their 1911s as well. So anyway, XDs, no more XD talk. So we can agree that Springfield Armory, if you're looking for an off-the-rack 1911 that's probably going to work, we can agree that Springfield is, good to go. Who else is good to go? Like, who else is, because I don't want to be like, and I don't want to shit on anybody, but like just kind of like a list, not even a list, but like who's going to make a gun that I probably won't need to do extensive gunsmithing to get it to work.
Sure. Well, I like Colts, but specifically the guns, and this is Colts nomenclature, which has kind of spread into the industry as well. Their Series 70 gun, which now at the Colt factory, that just refers to any gun without the Series 80 firing pin safety, whether it's an actual Series 70, roll mark gun or not. But I like any of the Colts which do not have the firing pin safety. I'm not so much that I hate drop safety as a concept. I think you should be able to drop your guns and it'd be safe. But I don't like how it doesn't belong in a 1911 because it doesn't physically belong in there. It makes a trigger linkage feel horrible. And depending on how the gun and its parts are timed together, which can change as the gun ages, because you're moving from linking the trigger to the top half of the gun, and that's affected by slide to frame fit. So you could get a Series 80 gun which goes bang one day and then sometime later doesn't, and that's kind of a drag.
Well, that's exciting. So Colt Series 70s, and if you guys go to Colt's website, they actually have on their website, you can sort out which ones are Series 70 from which ones aren't. It takes a little bit of work on to kind of figure it out, but I do want people to know that you can get a stainless steel 38 Super in as a Series 70. So that's really cool. So we got Springfield and Colt.
I like Dan Wesson. I always have their small parts quality is exceptional. There's, to my knowledge, having seen the guns up close and inside, it's all machine bar stock parts. So no MIM, no cast, just top of the line stuff, and their execution has been good. I've seen a number of their guns in old armor classes, crack them open, and the build quality is really good. Those guns worked. Taught a school recently with a large quantity of Dan Wessons in it, and they worked really well, or they were built real nice.
For reference too, for people listening, I also really like, not that my opinion should carry any near as much weight as Hilton's when it comes to this stuff. I had a Dan Wesson Valkyrie Commander, which was their 9mm Commander, and that gun ran like a sewing machine. It ate 2,000 rounds of every type, like all kinds of ammo, including some really garbage reloads that I had, and it ran, and with Wilson Combat ETM mags, it ran phenomenally well. And that was probably, that of all of the 1911s that I've shot, that one was probably my favorite in terms of shootability, build quality, and as a carry gun. I was so bummed when I sent it back to Dan Wesson. I was like, oh, they're like, well, you can buy it. And I'm like, yeah, my writer's price is still $1,100. So that is one thing I should note about Dan Wesson. It's not cheap, guys. You're going to be, and I think would you agree
that, you're paying
that
for that quality though? You're getting what you pay for, because you're paying for premium quality components and somebody who assembled it properly.
So, and that's kind of one of the things that people need to get your heads around is, if you want one of these 1911s that's probably going to work pretty well, that you're not going to have to do a lot of nonsense to, you can expect to pay at a minimum $1,000, for it. Like if you're getting into this, your starting point is $1,000, and really you should probably be thinking more like $1,200 to $1,500.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed. Yeah, $1,000. I'm not real up on the market, but as far as market pricing, and it's weird now anyway. Yeah, $1,000 pre-pandemic, that would have been definitely the bottom floor, and potentially like $1,000 would have gotten you one of those Colt Series 70 reproductions, which is pretty bare bones, just like it was in the old days. So you're gonna have to expect to do a bunch of stuff to it if you really want to do a lot of work with it. So yeah, for sure. You in 1911s, you will largely get what you pay for. I have not seen, other than a couple oddities where you're paying for somebody's royalties or whatever oddness. You're going to get what you pay for as far as the grade of parts and the labor that went into it.
So, staying on that 1911 train, a question I frequently get asked is, what about Ruger's 1911s? Because, and the reason I get asked this question is, Ruger obviously makes one of the most bomb-proof revolvers on the planet, and they have the advantage, unlike some of these other companies, of being able to own the entire manufacturing process of this gun, from casting the frames and slides in-house all the way up through small parts, because they own all of their small part manufacturing as well.
Okay.
And they're affordable. And now the problem is, I get asked this question. I'm like, honestly, I stopped doing my 1911 tests before I ever got to Ruger. So I don't know. Have you cracked any of them open or seen them?
Yeah, we had a number of them in the classes when they were fairly new. If I recall, though, the slides are bar stock. The frames absolutely are cast. Keep in mind,
the slides are. I'm sorry. Yeah, the slides are bar stock. That's my bad.
Yeah. So for listeners / viewers, the casting process, Ruger's casting is pretty much at the top of the game as it goes in the industry as far as casting, because we'll not make any industry enemies, but there's a well-known 1911 derivative manufacturer who also casts frames, and the porosity and surface finish of their frames kind of tells you that they're not at the top of the game. But the way, since Ruger owns their own foundry, and they also cast for Caspian, they do really, really high quality castings where, honestly, if no one told you, you might not necessarily know that it was a casting, because you don't see the voids and the holes and the dimpling and the crudeness of surface that's so common with cast stuff. The guns that we saw in class worked. They were put together well. They had, if I recall, Novak dovetail front and rear sights. They work. They were uneventful. It's kind of just like everything else Ruger does, where it is functional. Maybe you're not going to go run around and parade it down the street because it's kind of no frills or whatever. They're getting it done. I have not kept up on what they're doing with them now, but the ones I saw when they first came out were fine. They're solid.
So they actually have done, this year they opened up their, oh God, I'm going to get it wrong. It's not performance. It's their, so Ruger started their own custom shop. They're like
Okay.
an in-house, just like Smith has their in-house performance center and stuff like that. And one of their launch items was Doug Koenig Special Edition 1911, which people blinked pretty hard at that because I think it was $1,500 for a Ruger 1911, but the it all seemed pretty solid. Again, haven't shot it, don't know. My reports are secondhand. What I can tell people is that the Ruger Custom Shop Super GP100 in 9mm, their 8-shot 9mm revolver, is really nice. It's very thoughtfully put together. It is very much a product improved GP100. All of the engagement surfaces are a little bit cleaner. One of the important things for GP100s is to help clean up the trigger pull is if you shim the hammer. And because all of the parts are cast, there's a certain amount of variance, in your frame to your hammer and all of that stuff. So your regular off the line guns don't come with shimmed hammers, and the custom shop guns that I have and the match champion guns that I've got do, and they came with extra shims in case you wanted to, in case it needed a little bit more on the left or a little bit more on the right. Okay. So my hope is that level of care and attention is also going into their special edition 1911. But yeah, unfortunately, I have not shot the Ruger 1911s. And so for all of the people who wanted to know what we thought about Ruger 1911s, the answer is, well, they're probably fine. Maybe.
They have been fine. How about that?
Perfect. So, and moving on to other manufacturers, there are two companies that make 1911s who use proprietary extractor designs, Smith & Wesson and SIG. So tell us about the SIG two-piece extractor and why it's the devil. If you guys are just listening to this, he'll just lean all the way off camera like he was about to fall over.
Oh, look at the time. I got this thing at a place with the people. Yeah.
I gotta go. I don't want to talk about SIG's extractor.
Go. All right. Let's actually just lump the concept together and remove it from the brand, because there are multiple brands trying to execute this. Which of course you already called out, SIG and Smith & Wesson, right? So the external extractor, because if you rewound and listen to the beginning of the podcast where we're talking about the leaf spring extractor design of the 1911, you go, well, why don't it's modernized? It has a pivot pin, a fixed claw, and then a coil spring that powers the other end, much like a lot of service pistols, including the Smith & Wesson semi-autos and so forth. So why doesn't that work? Well, unfortunately, like trying to reverse engineer things into a 1911 that don't really have room in there, for example, like firing pin safety, as I already talked about. An external extractor is one of those things, especially on and I'll speak specifically to a 45. Because those are the most common versions. When the barrel links down, so for listeners, if you're listening to this and your gun is basically this, like, you know how the Keebler elves have that magic tree where magic happens in there and cookies come out? If that's basically how your gun is to you, magic happens in there, noise comes out one end, you're maybe fast forward through this because you're going to stroke out. But I'll make it as brief and clear as I can. If you take a look at your safe and empty gun and you tip the slide back, move the slide back a little bit, the rear end of the barrel moves down. It links down. Think about if there's a cartridge in there, it is pulling the cartridge down relative to the breech face each time the barrel links down. And that is on its way to the back for the cartridge to hit the ejector to eject. the extractor has to hold on to it during that trip, or else, well, then the trip is a little irregular, or maybe not a very secure trip. In a regular 1911 extractor, it sits low enough because it's got a little tunnel inside where it lives. It's able to sit low enough where it is able to hold on to that cartridge for the whole trip, even after the barrel has pushed it down farther on the breech face. However, the external extractor you can only put it in a certain spot, because otherwise you'll end up cutting the slide in half. Look at the outside of your 1911 slide, because it's got to be outside that spot where it is cut down for the ejection port window. So if you cut it too low there, the slide will crack in half. So you can only put it so far. When you link down on an external extractor, the barrel basically pulls the cartridge almost completely off the extractor hook. So the little trip back to the ejector, sometimes it goes, sometimes it doesn't.
Sometimes it works great, sometimes it doesn't work so great. Well, and that is, right. Again, that's, a very concise explanation for a lot of the gremlins that live inside 1911s that make it all work together. Other considerations for 1911s, you've said in the past that the further you get away from 5-inch, from the government model design, the more likely you are to have problems. Is that still true? And does that apply with like 2011s, which were, designed to be space magic in the first place?
To a degree, yes, because the design is engineered to have a certain amount of slide travel and the slide velocity. So 5-inch 45 slide moves at a certain rate and at a certain distance. If you get a commander or one of the officers, the little itty bitty things, the slide is really, really lightweight and it doesn't go as far. If you look, if you can't figure this out, lock your 1911 open and look, and there's this little round button thingy at the back behind the magazine well on top of the frame. That's the head of the disconnector. You can see that on a 1911 government model. You can see less of it on a commander. You barely make it to that thing on an officer's model. So the less slide travel you have and a lighter slide, the faster it goes. Your magazine can only push the rounds up at a certain rate because of the spring and 45s. And so, yeah, you start doing the math where one part, the top part, goes faster than it's supposed to. The magazine's still only going at the same speed. At some point, it's gonna fail.
Well, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So with moving back to 2011, so there's a lot of, is Staccato the only company that's like really making a commercially viable, mass-produced double stack 2011 right now? Because I feel like the rest of the ones out there are definitely more towards, like, obviously Chambers Custom is exactly that. It's a hand-built custom gun.
Right, he's a custom shop. Yep.
And I think Triarch is also, hand-built custom guns as well. And then you have Staccato out here, like, just, churning them out as fast as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's differences in there, and you actually kind of have it layered where Chambers Custom, of course, he's a very small, super high-end shop where the guns are hand-built one at a time by him and his small crew. So that's a whole different product. So whatever you're getting out of a shop like his is going to be, can't be evaluated against something that, something else. Staccato is the only company in the game. And we're discounting Strayer Voigt / Infinity because they're strictly in the competition market.
Right.
So Staccato is the only player in the game, which I don't think a lot of people understand this. They're the only player in the game who's actually a manufacturer and not a custom shop or an assembler of other people's parts. Every single, they're machining those slides and frames and the barrels in-house from their own source materials, made in the U.S. source materials. Machining or having contracted shops machining all the parts to their spec, all right, versus say, hold on, I need to pause for dramatic thought here, versus say having a gun which looks maybe super cool for whatever reason because it's painted up nice or something, but is composed of all parts that you recognize from the Brownells catalog. You are not a manufacturer then. You're an assembler or a builder.
And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that if you're buying good parts and building them
Sure,
correctly.
sure. But that is an inherent difference, though, as industry guys, which we know that is a difference versus, hey, I built this gun, I bought all the parts, they're premium grade, I assembled the gun, did the build process, everything is cool, fitted everything. Yes, that's absolutely a legit and viable product, but it is not to be confused with, hey, we manufactured all of this. Every single part in here is to our blueprint. We did every single part of this down to the pins.
That actually reminds me, I wanted to ask you about the not 2011 9mm double stack 1911 style gun, the Wilson Combat gun, because it's definitely
Okay.
not. Yeah, it's
I
definitely.
was afraid you were going somewhere else because there's another one that, because 2011 actually Staccato trademarked that.
Oh, good job.
So yeah, it makes it a little tough. I like to think of it as double stack 1911 double stack modular. I know it's a bit of a mouthful. I'm going to make it a thing. I'm totally making it a thing. But that is
Yeah.
actually what it is, where you have a modular plastic bottom and a steel chassis up on top. There is a couple double stack 1911 family guns, which are all steel.
Well, we could. I could talk about the old pair ordinances for a while, and we
But
could
let's
talk
not.
about how they,
But let's not.
for a while, for like 2 minutes, they were like the hotness,
I
and
had one.
then
I had one. Yep.
they're like, these are dog shit now.
It took a lot of work to get mine to work.
But no, so what I did want to talk about was
Oh
the
yes, so
Wilson
the
Combat
Wilson. Yes.
EDC. It's the EDC
Yeah.
X9. So, and
Yeah.
that is, they basically started, and Wilson Combat, everybody knows, well, if you don't know, Wilson Combat is, probably the best known 1911 custom gunsmith.
Mm-hmm.
And so, how familiar are you with the EDC gun? Have you worked with it, played with it, taken it
Um,
apart?
I have not taken it apart, but I'm familiar with what it's like inside. We have a mutual friend who has one. He's been in a number of my classes
Mm-hmm.
with his EDC 9. The thing that I usually want to impress on people when they ask about that one, it is, while it has a strong 1911 lineage, it is a unique gun because it uses unique extractor, different barrel linkage, brand new proprietary magazine, and the grip is only vaguely 1911 feeling. I feel like it's kind of a little bit of a cross between a 1911 and a Beretta 92, because I know Bill Wilson's kind of a big fan of Beretta 92s.
Mm-hmm.
He kind of brought them back into being cool.
He did. In many ways, we have Wilson Combat almost to thank for the current 92 revolution that we've got going on, because they did their special editions and they sold like hotcakes. So then Ernest was able to do the LTT guns, and those all sell like hotcakes. And now Beretta itself is like, wait a minute, we can make more money if we just put some nicer touches on these guns. Then we keep all the money instead of some of the money. But it's great because, right, if you're a 92 guy, and I feel like there's a lot of crossover between 1911 people who like 1911s and people who like 92s. If you're a 92 guy, this is the best time to be alive, because you can get a high quality gun from Beretta itself. You can get a high quality gun from Wilson Combat. You get a really super high quality gun from Langdon Tactical.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. I did find just for reference for people listening, I did find a Wilson Combat EDC X9 with the 4-inch gun on Grab a Gun, who is not a show sponsor, but they're cool people, for $2,900. So that's a big chest full of money right there. $3,000 for a gun that is really. I've shot my our friend who has one. I've shot his gun, and it is a really nice gun. And also, I should point out that he's carrying a Staccato P right now. So, I don't. That's not a knock on the EDC X9. It really isn't. I feel like sometimes people forget about it with all of the 2011 stuff that's been going on lately. They're like, oh yeah, this gun exists. And then they look at the price tag and they're like, I'm happy that gun exists, but I'm not buying it.
Right. Also, another distinction, dovetailing into what we talked about as far as manufacturing versus being a boutique shop who's assembling everything. Wilson kind of bridges the gap because he's got the juice where he is obviously manufacturing everything. And you're also getting a high-end smithing shop that's putting that stuff together. So it's you are indeed paying more for something like the EDC9, or if you bought a CQB or a tactical super grade or whatever, which all, by the way, are super nicely executed 1911s. You're paying for more, not just because the Wilson name, but because it's going to be a good gun that some dude or series of dudes slaved over, using parts that they all spec'd and manufactured in-house. So it's next level in pricing because it's next level in quality. It's legit.
So there you go, guys. If you want to, really spend some money on a 1911, get a Wilson because it'll be great.
Go crazy.
Speaking of building 1911s, are you planning on getting back into making guns again, or are you going to stick to selling?
That is funny. I didn't know this was a comedy show. Fantastic.
Hey, people, I'm just asking the questions that people want the answers to.
Yeah. No, people are going to ask. People have asked, and just the practicality of it all is that I don't see how. I hadn't had a day off all calendar year until I forced myself to take some time off at Thanksgiving, because there's just that much going on. The company is very small, largely me, with a couple support, and I do pretty much everything you see. So if you order something and you write a nice note in there, I'm writing it by hand, a reply. Or I've dictated, because if you go, oh, Hilton's got girly handwriting and there's hearts on it, or I dictated the response. But anyway, I'm in every level of it. I am designing all the parts that we sell. I QC all of them personally. So I'm in it. And also that YouTube channel, I recorded and played all the music. I filmed the thing. I edit it. So, oh yeah, and I'm doing all my own social media too. So there's a lot of stuff on the plate, and building guns is not on there. There's no room for it.
No,
I need another plate.
Right, you need another plate. You need like a whole nother Hilton is what you need.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Speaking of 10-8 performance and the parts that you're making right now. So right now you've got a pretty extensive catalog of Glock parts and M&P parts as well, because you used to, like back in the day, M&Ps were really hot and people were buying them, and that market has kind of tailed off, would you say?
Yeah, I would say basically around the time I retired and really got back into the industry, because I kind of had to be out for a little bit prior to my retirement in 2019. The M&P market was on the wane, and I didn't know it. So actually sitting on a bunch of M&P stuff from pre-retirement, the market absolutely just fell clean out of it. For a while, it was where it was a close second to Glock stuff, and now it's not even a distant, I don't have enough fingers. So it's way out there. The prices have come down on it. The platform hadn't evolved the way that I would hoped, even with the 2.0. Still accuracy issues. The trigger mechanism is what it is. So, if you drop in a whole bunch of Apex parts and stuff, it's like a plastic 1911, old school. So, hey, the Extractor, it might work, might not. Well, Apex has got one, so we'll put it in there. The gun may or may not group with ammo. Oh, Apex will fix that. They've got a setup for that. Trigger kind of blows. Well, Apex will fix that. And the sights are kind of marked. Well, thankfully, at least we can fix that for you.
There you go.
But yeah, I mean, if you want to get into it where you customize it, the platform's still viable. So like if you're a CCW user, or even an LEO who is forced by department policy to buy a gun, but they got some latitude, it's not like it's going to blow up on you and kill you. But the way the market is shaped out, Gen 5 Glock and the SIG 320, I feel, have basically eaten the M&P's lunch, as far as coming in with a gun that comes right off the shelf, that has superiority in many different facets, and then aftermarket support for Glock obviously is tremendous.
Are you going to start doing aftermarket stuff for the 320, since it appears to have eaten everybody's lunch?
It really has. I have sights right now. I've got regular, like number 6, number 8 front rear combos for the iron-sighted shooters, and then the optic height sights for obviously the optic. Working on base pads for it, and at that point, I think those are pretty much where I usually hit. I do sights and base pads for each platform that I look really hard at. And obviously with DoD into the M17 and M18, the gun's not going anywhere for a while.
Yeah, that's very true. It's a shame too because the M18's a sack of crap and I hate it. Sorry, no, I had this realization that I have become that guy who, when the government adopted the Beretta and he was like, "Oh, this gun's a sack of crap and I hate it. I just want my own 1911." I'm now that guy, but for the Beretta, not the 1911. I'm like, "Oh, this stupid SIG sucks and it's light and it triggers crappy." Because I will say this: all of the mill M18s that I've gotten my grubby little armorer hands on have had garbage triggers. Just
So are they heavy, or are they crunchy, or or indistinct and grindy?
they're indistinct and grindy.
Okay.
There's the ones that I've messed with. There's obvious take up, and then you hit a wall, and the take up's kind of grimy. The take up, it would be like, it's like dragging a stick across gravel for the take up. Then you hit a wall and you stomp on the stick and you break it, and then you take the broken stick and drag it through more gravel. And that's how I
Hmm.
would describe the M18 trigger. And you know, even a people hate on the Beretta for a lot of reasons. I don't think most of them. Probably the most reasonable criticism of the Beretta is it's huge, it's big, and if you have
Yeah, I
tiny
can't get my
hands,
hands around one.
it's a tough gun to shoot. I accept that criticism. That's why the Vertec exists. We should have just done that anyway. But even the one criticism of the Beretta that I don't think was valid was about the trigger, because guns straight from the factory had really good double action triggers, and the single action trigger on a brand new, on a stock, factory gun was always a really great trigger, like a good shooting trigger. And
Sure.
to me, I think the M18 is going in the wrong direction as a shooting gun, but it's a gun that makes sense if for general issue.
Hmm.
Uh, let's see. So we've talked all about 1911s. Let's move off of the gear side and onto the shooting things side. So you and I were
Okay.
recently in a video that got very popular on Instagram,
Oh yeah, yeah,
where
yeah.
and if you guys haven't seen it, you can see it on my Instagram, which is radicaleb _ at the end, or on Hilton's, which is 10-8 Performance, or on Modern Samurai Project. We were in a head-to-head shoot-off, single shots on 25-yard steel from whatever holster. And what's interesting about this video to me, and I know we talked about it at the time, is it illustrates how unimportant gear is when you're shooting well. Because I'm running a revolver with an 8-pound trigger and a red dot sight from a competition holster, and you were running a 2011. Yeah, you still had the 2011 that day. You hadn't switched the Glock.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Right,
you were running a 2011 from a duty holster, and our draw times
right.
were almost exactly the same, and we were neck and neck. And so what I wanted to ask you about is, knowing this, why do you think people get so wrapped up in the gear instead of developing their fundamentals?
Nah, this is always an age-old thing. Remember back when I had the blog, Modern Service Weapons, it was the same thing where if I did an article, a lengthy, in-depth article about training, it would get crickets. And I would post just a random picture of some gear and people would just fawn all over it. Because to just cut right to it, it is easy to buy a piece of gear, look at gear, and it makes you feel good because it's shiny new gear in America. Um, and then maybe training. Oh, that metric's hard. Oh, that doesn't make me feel good. Let me go back and look at the gear. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
training's hard. Oh, because I'm not doing this well. Or I got to work hard. I got to get off the couch and wipe the Cheeto dust off or something. It's basically about what makes people feel good. Um, Training doesn't necessarily make everybody feel good. Makes us feel good because we're a bunch of weirdos. We love the training. Love punishing ourselves, love challenging ourselves. with the training. But it's easy to get fixated on the gear because, people are like, hey, Hilton, you're going to get a revolver or this or that. And it's like, you know what? Because actually somebody asked that specifically on the Facebook for 10-8 Performance. And I said, look, there's nothing wrong with going against my buddy. We're evenly matched in skill set. It was a good time. We were neck and neck. It was just honestly, like we were saying, it doesn't matter who was missing less because we were pushing it. We had the gas pedal all the way down just to see. And then, when you got the gas all the way down, sometimes you crash into the wall, sometimes you hit the highway.
Right. So, and training is the best place to do that because that lets us set our benchmarks and it lets us understand how well we can perform, especially in an environment like that. I had some guy on YouTube be like, oh, Caleb lost the first round so he could take the easy way and get the win. And I was like, any road that ends with shooting against Hilton is not the easy fucking road, my dude. Right? Like, but it's funny because people look at the gear that we have. They look at, a revolver with an acro on it. And I know for an absolute fact that people have seen my gun and seen me shoot that gun on YouTube or on Instagram and stuff like that and gone out and tried to replicate my setup. And the reason I'm good at shooting that gun has nothing to do with the gun itself and everything to do with the 23,000 rounds I shot through revolvers and the practice and the reps and all of that. All I've done by adding a red dot and adding a comp is I've made it easier to focus on the stuff that helps me shoot faster. Not I haven't made the gun shoot any faster or any more
make
accurate,
you faster somehow magically.
I haven't made myself. The red people, I'm trying to think of the best way to explain it. Stuff like red dots and compensators, and that they're not shortcuts to skill. What they are is they're shortcuts to accessing already developed skill. Like if you're good at shooting and now you add these things to your gun, it's going to take away stuff that you had to focus on previously. Like for me, for a red dot, it's one less thing for me to do because now I'm not looking at my front sight anymore. I'm just looking straight at the target. So that means I can take
the target dot appears.
Exactly. Which I'll tell, the internet a secret. I've been doing that with iron sighted guns for years, where there's a reason why, if you look at my competition guns, I have a fiber optic front sight and a blacked out rear sight. Cause I can just keep both eyes open and look through that. And if I got a blurry, I have a blurry green dot over the target or a blurry red dot over the target. What does that sound like?
Yeah, that sounds familiar. Yeah, I mean, case in point, day 2 of the class, I brought Glock 19 that minimally modified in the scheme of things. It has a minus connector. It has a red dot, and then what we open up with 25-yard B8s, which you'd think, hey, largely stock, minimally modified Glock 19. Wow, you sure you don't want to get that 2011 back out?
Didn't you shoot a 99 on one of those B8s?
Yes, I did. I shot all in the night. I shot a 98, 99. Yeah.
But Hilton, the internet told me Glocks aren't accurate.
Well, sorry, internet.
The internet also told me. Go ahead.
Oh, no. Yeah, what did the internet also tell you?
The internet also told me that revolvers are more inherently accurate than semi-autos. And yes, while I also shot every target in the 90s, my best target of the day was also a 99, which sounds like it probably has a lot more to do with what's articulating the gun than the gun itself.
Yeah, for sure. I think people want to buy that performance where there's no shortcut to the performance. You got to put in the time, put in the effort, and there's no way about it. However, I'll offer this one thing. Because we are, after all, entrepreneurs and we live in a capitalist market and society, if you hate your gun because, I don't know, maybe it's issued to you and you hate it, or you bought it because someone told you this was great and you hate it, you're less likely to train with it and therefore less likely to develop skills on it because you won't shoot it. If you have something that you just love, you just can't unglue it from your hands. I don't care what it is, a revolver with an optic, a Glock 2011, whatever, and it makes you want to train more, then have at it. You get bored with it and you need something else to spark your interest in training, then, I know that's how the market works. That's fine. Got nothing against that. But the end goal as we're probably noting here, is that you got to get out and train. I don't care whether you have just that one ratted out gun, that's whatever it is that, gives you the moral high ground. I only got the one gun, I shoot it all the time. Or you got 30 of them that you shoot barely, but you shoot one of them all the time. You're shooting something all the time.
Well, and that's the thing.
Get trained.
People ask me why I do all this stuff with revolvers. And the answer to that question is I like it. And I am far more likely, and I discovered years ago that if I'm, looking at my calendar or my schedule for the day, and I'm like, all right, I've got 15 minutes to dry fire, am I more likely to pick up a revolver and dry fire that than I am a semi-auto? Turned out the answer was yes. So because I was more likely to do it, because I got more enjoyment from it, I'm like, I'll just stick with this, because my desire to train is higher when I'm training with a platform that I like. Now, I should note for everybody listening, there are days still when I don't want to dry fire or anything. I don't want to swing kettlebells. I don't want to run laps. There's days when I don't want to do any of it. Those are the most important days for me to do it, because unless I'm trying to rehab an injury or something, I've got time. I've got 20 minutes to dry fire.
Yeah, for sure. My AirPod just gave me the warning of running out of battery.
Well, we're at an hour and 20 minutes. So I feel like an admonishment of people to go. We spent an hour talking about guns and 20 minutes talking about trading. So I think people will probably like this podcast.
There you go. We did what we just admonished people to. Wait, what?
Yeah, exactly. All right, man. Well, it was great to talk to you. Where can people find you online?
All right, people can find me online on the gram at 108 Performance. You can find me at my website, www.10-8performance.com. That's the numbers. Also find me on the YouTubes. I've got a growing list of stuff, especially for you 2011 users, a big playlist of topics there, 108 Performance. And I guess the Facebook too. The Facebook.
Gotta have them all, right?
Yeah, got them all. So, but yeah, hit the website. All the links to those different outlets are there as well. I'm most active on Instagram, so check it out.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. And for the listeners out there, make sure you like, share, subscribe, tell your friends, cousins, uncles. And in the show notes, I'm going to have links to some merch as well. So you guys can buy shirts that will ship to you at some point from, whatever factory they're made in China. I don't know. Thanks for listening, everybody. And we will be back next week.